Perhaps to compensate for our friend Luke Beasley, somehow getting him to briefly criticize MAGA Republicans, self-professed a nonpartisan journalist, Piers Morgan, spent 30 minutes spraying progressive journalist Mehdi Hasan with false equivalences on his latest pro-Trump anti-Biden panel. But unfortunately for Piers, Mehdi brought the receipts. But before we unpack all that, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert bells before you go. All right, friends, we have another pro-Trump, anti-Biden Piers Morgan panel, which means we've got to talk about it. And it's good content. It's good content for Piers. It's good content for me. I enjoy it. And this time, Piers Morgan brought back Mehdi Hasan, one of the best debaters in media and one of the best progressive commentators in media as well, to talk about the aftermath of the assassination attempt on Donald Trump. Piers Morgan did what he always does, which is try to create false equivalence to grade Trump and Republicans on a curve. But thank God, Mehdi Hasan was not having it. So we're going to play some of these clips and unpack them together.
Look, that is a very fair point. I'm not a fan of Destiny, but let me just put some of what he was saying in context, because I watched that discussion. I think the point he was trying to make, and I think he did it badly, is that there is a double standard here. That as with the Palestine-Israel debate, where you tend to only ask Palestinians to condemn and not Israelis, journalists, not just yourself, tend to obsess over liberals condemning stuff while conservatives get a pass. And I think that is what bothers a lot of people. It certainly bothers me. And, you know, you mentioned condemning violence, Piers. On Monday's show, you had Ben Shapiro on. I think you had Dan, the Texas Congressman Dan Crenshaw on. And you had Rudy Giuliani on, right? All three of them have at some point glorified violence, embraced violence, incited violence. Dan Crenshaw's put out videos where he's blowing stuff up, beating up left-wingers. Rudy Giuliani, as you know, Piers, on January the 6th, told an armed mob to do trial by combat. Ben Shapiro had to deny any influence on the Quebec City mosque shooter who killed 6 Muslims in January 2017. Ben Shapiro called Obama a fascist. You didn't ask any of those three people to condemn their own past. So that's, I think, what bothers Destiny, certainly bothers me.
And it bothers me too. This is the trouble that Piers Morgan and enlightened centrists like him have going up against somebody like Mehdi Hasan, because he has the receipts, he has the knowledge, and he's absolutely correct, as we've discussed. Ben Shapiro is just an easy example, because Ben Shapiro was cited in the manifesto of the Quebec mosque shooter. Now, Shapiro went on a tour very defiantly and said, I had nothing to do with it. I'm not responsible for it, both legally and morally. And when asked, okay, well, did your rhetoric contribute to such an environment? Ben Shapiro said, hell no. And yet, when the shoe's on the other foot and a registered Republican takes a shot at Donald Trump, Ben Shapiro wants to blame the increasing of the temperature from the left and Democrats and President Biden. So again, the double standard there is inexcusable. If you think rhetoric contributes to a hostile environment, which in turn can contribute to political violence, that's fine, but be symmetrical. That means Democrats and Republicans can contribute to it, and you should be prepared to call them out. Or if you think that, listen, political commentators engaging in rhetoric, we shouldn't be held not just legally, but morally. We shouldn't even be held morally responsible for whatever environment we may or may not help contribute to, then again, you should be symmetrical. Meaning, Ben, if you're giving yourself a pass, then you should give Democrats a pass too, unless, of course, you're a dishonest, unprincipled loser, which, of course, we know he is. He will constantly grade Republicans and conservatives on a curve. It doesn't matter, even in a perfect apples-to-apples comparison. Another clip here between Piers Morgan and Mehdi Hasan, and this is in response to, insinuations that Piers Morgan is a conservative. He is, but he denies it. And then he tries to pin Mehdi Hasan with a gotcha, because Mehdi Hasan has suggested that Donald Trump is a fascist and authoritarian who has used propaganda and rhetoric from Adolf Hitler.
Said with is, this idea that somehow the left have been completely blameless. And just to remind people, I'm not on the right. I'm not a conservative, never have been, right? I mean, I voted for Margaret Thatcher when I was about 18. But I've also voted for Tony Blair, and I've voted for, left-wing leaders before. And I ran a Daily Mirror, which, as you know, was a left-leaning newspaper in Britain for 10 years.
I just want to, Mehdi Hasan's laughing at that. Margaret Thatcher, of course, being, the British Ronald Reagan. Tony Blair is not on the left. He was a close ally of George W. Bush. Again, the idea that Tony Blair is some sort of leftist acolyte, and then you see how Mehdi has to trail off because he actually can't remember the last time he voted for somebody from the Labor Party or the Liberal Democrats or things like that. He's clearly a conservative, which is why he struggled there. And that's why Mehdi Hasan was laughing.
So this idea that I'm on the right, as some people try and paint me, is for the birds. However, what I try and do is be fair-minded about the culpability of both sides. And I'll return the favour by criticising you, because one of my big bugbears here has been the persistent analogies and comparisons of Donald Trump to Adolf Hitler. And I want to play...
And he goes on and plays clips of Mehdi Hasan when Mehdi Hasan was part of MSNBC, where he either participated in or said things like Donald Trump uses Nazi iconography, Nazi propaganda, Nazi rhetoric, and even, you know, in certain quotes like immigrants poison the blood of our country, that is apparently lifted almost word for word from Mein Kampf. And Donald Trump, who is famously not particularly well read, according to an ex-girlfriend or ex-wife, actually had a copy of Mein Kampf as well. So again, food for thought. So we played that. This is Mehdi Hasan responding to Piers Morgan on the other side of those clips.
I stand by the line that Donald Trump is echoing the rhetoric of Adolf Hitler. He is. That's a fact. Donald Trump praised Hitler, according to his own Republican chief of staff. That is a fact. And stop saying the left calls him Hitler. You know who called him America's Hitler? His running mate, J.D. Vance, a Republican senator, called him America's Hitler. So don't give me this BS
he was wrong
that this
too.
is the left.
He was
Republicans...
wrong too.
Doesn't matter whether he was wrong. You're wrong to say it was the left. J.D. Vance called him. Well, no, you're wrong. You're wrong, Piers, because J.D. Vance is a Republican. He compared him to Hitler. People who have looked at what Trump and said has done, fascism experts, have said the guy is echoing fascist rhetoric. This is...
Yeah, right. Democratic Congressman Jamie Raskin said, if the semi-fascist shoe fits, then you will semi-wear it. Yeah, listen, I mean, this idea that we're somehow morally obligated to not call Donald Trump what we believe him to be and what the evidence shows him to be, which is an authoritarian who uses fascist rhetoric. And so I think it's perfectly fair to call him a fascist or a semi-fascist or whatever, because he suffered a failed assassination attempt, is ridiculous. And the idea that referring to him that way somehow makes us, again, civilly or morally responsible for a registered Republican taking a shot at him is ridiculous. And in this clip, Mehdi Hasan calls out the temperature increases. They go back and forth. Mehdi Hasan, a clearly fed up Mehdi Hasan, calls out Piers even more directly for his false equivalences and both sidesism.
You have acted as if there's two sides to this, that the Democrats are guilty of the same incitement and violence. There's not. I'm sorry. All right, let's play a game.
I've literally just played a bunch of people calling him Hitler for the last 8 years.
Those are not... Sorry. Well, no, you didn't, actually. You played a clip from Willie Geist accurately reporting that Trump said Hitler did good things.
No, I played many people.
Hold on.
I can play a few again if you like.
Hold on. Piers, Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, Hakeem Jeffries, Chuck Schumer, leadership of the Democratic Party. Can you play to me clips of them inciting violence in the same way as Donald Trump, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Ron DeSantis, Paul Gosar?
Why are you deflecting?
Because you are deflecting, Piers. I'm not going to sit here and let you do both sides bullshit tonight.
Kudos to Mehdi Hasan. This is exactly how people should react. Listen, I praise Luke and I stand by it. Luke did a miracle when he was on Piers Morgan's show, which is that through gentility and grace and patience, he was able to redirect Piers Morgan's energy, especially when he was up against, C.J. Pearson, who is this young right-wing lunatic, right, who just clearly operates under the presumption that the very flawed, very authoritarian Republican Party is perfect. And so Luke was able to not only defeat CJ by just being much better versed on the facts, but he was also able to, again, accomplish a miracle by redirecting Piers Morgan's ire, however briefly, to the GOP, which is virtually impossible. But I also think that, people like Mehdi Hasan and more aggressive rhetoricians like him, and Wajah Ali, who was also on, I think it was the same episode that Luke was on, and I mentioned it in another video as well, the more aggressive, no-nonsense rhetoricians, I think that also has utility, because what Piers Morgan's doing isn't necessarily saying that the problem is exclusively on the left, right? Perhaps even he thinks that would be a bridge too far. But he is trying to create a false equivalence, which is just, quite frankly, indefensible, right? I mean, it's almost like saying, again, just to use a really reductive example, that you have one town in which, let's say, 10 people have a cold, and then you have another town in which, there's the 50% of the population has rabies, and then you would say, both of these towns are infectious. Both of these towns are plague-ridden, or you have two criminals, right? One is a shoplifter and the other is an axe murderer. And you say, well, they're both criminals. And that's the end of the analysis, that you don't actually identify any meaningful distinctions between the two things that you're comparing. That is both stupid and also incredibly dishonest, right? It's both of these things because it's not accurate. When meaningful distinctions exist between two things that you're comparing, they're probably worth identifying. But Piers Morgan is reluctant to do that because he knows that an honest, blunt assessment of the situation, even if you want to say that aggressive rhetoric exists on both sides, it's fine. But then, it's objectively worse, far worse on the Republican side. I don't think Mehdi Hasan, Luke Beasley, Destiny, I don't think any people would actually have an objection with that. But what Piers Morgan wants to do is not add that second part of the sentence. He doesn't want to add the second clause. He just wants to say there are problems on both sides. Not there are problems on both sides. And by the way, analyses reveal that, one side has a much bigger problem than the other. Just the problem exists on both sides. He wants to simplify it. It's just absolutely ridiculous. And quite frankly, shouldn't be taken all that seriously. I do want to play here another clip as well while I'm thinking about it. And this is Piers Morgan and Mehdi Hasan facing off on one final issue in which Piers Morgan actually goes beyond false equivalence and wants to exclusively focus on one side at the expense of the other, and that is whether or not Donald Trump and President Biden are mentally fit.
Just partisans on both sides, they'd vote for a corpse as their candidate. The latest polls show Trump up by 2 points. It's still a ridiculously close race. Obviously, Trump's got the edge. He's got momentum. But you're going to get annoyed at me again. Sorry, Piers, I've got to say this. Again, the bias in your questions. You say Biden can't string a sentence together. Nor can Trump. But you never point that out.
Oh, we can.
That's what bothers me.
But that's where you're so wrong.
Oh, we can. Oh, we can, Kenny.
Okay.
Oh, we can, Kenny. Yes, on Monday you got really worked up.
Do one thing.
No, let me finish an answer, Piers. Can I have one answer?
Please.
One answer. Trump cannot finish sentences. On Monday, you pointed out that Biden gets people's names wrong. You don't point out that Trump gets even more people's names wrong. Last month, he said he passed a dementia test. He got the name of the doctor wrong. Instead of saying Ronnie Jackson, he said Ronnie Johnson. He's confused Obama and Biden. He confused Nancy Pelosi and Nikki Haley. He's confused Iraq and Syria. He confused World War II with World War III. He's confused the leader of Turkey with the leader of Hungary. He's confused the leader of China with the leader of North Korea. He called Tim Cook Tim Apple, right? And he even got his own running mate's name wrong. He called J.D. Vance J.D. Mandel a couple of years back. So Donald Trump gets way more names wrong. He's way more incoherent. He's way more ignorant.
Which one of you?
Yes,
which one of the two of them? Which one
Trump
of the
is much worse.
Which one of the two of them would you trust to drive you home?
And so he completely changes the subject. By the way, what a ridiculous question. We don't know the driving skills of either of these two men. I mean, as presidents, even as former presidents, they're typically not driving. President, I don't think they can legally drive. Secret Service refuses to let them do that. Donald Trump hasn't driven anything other than a golf cart, I imagine, in years, because again, he's a billionaire and a former president who's driven around by security. The question is, who can run the country? The question is, if you want to compare mental fitness, are they both mentally unfit? Are they both mentally fit? Are they both to varying degrees? And as we talked about, the polls show that, yes, a majority of Americans also have doubts about Donald Trump's mental fitness. And he's right. Piers Morgan never wants to talk about that. He never wants to talk about the endless spree of gaffes and non sequiturs and ridiculous tangents. And again, Mehdi Hasan brings the receipts. And note that Piers won't engage with any of them, which happens every time these two get into a room, virtually speaking, and Mehdi brings the receipts. Piers can't engage. He doesn't say, you know what, that's a good point, but here's why I think that Donald Trump is more mentally fit than Joe Biden. Or, you know what, Mehdi, you're actually wrong about some of those examples. Let me debunk them for you. It's fake news. He doesn't engage with it at all. And this is why I have such contempt for enlightened centrism, because at the end of the day, there are meaningful distinctions between these two things. President Biden has an objectively far greater legislative and executive record than Donald Trump, which is a far greater measure of competence than even public communication. And if we're going to turn to public communication, Donald Trump can't answer questions directly. He can't answer questions substantively. He constantly engages in the same sort of gaffes that are attributable to Biden as well. So you have two very old men who are very prone to gaffes. And according to the vast majority of polls, a majority of Americans have doubts about both their mental fitness. So you actually need to engage in substantive analysis. And at the end of the day, Biden comes off better if you do that. Let me know what you think in the comments.